I want to introduce the story by talking a little bit about Ethel Early over here on the left. Ethel Early, or Ethel Early Clark, lived in Roanoke in the early 1900s. She was a cook. She was, for a long time, a cafeteria manager at the Gilmer Elementary School in Gainsboro, in the Gainsboro neighborhood. And she was involved in so many clubs and so many charitable outreaches. It's difficult to even name them, but she really made a huge impact on Roanoke through her involvement in garden clubs. And she became involved with a group called the Big Lit Garden Club. She was one of the founders of this group. And they turned the heads of city council and the Chamber of Commerce, and their beautification efforts in the Gainsboro neighborhood were so impressive that the Chamber of Commerce partnered with them on community beautification, and the city council gifted them a post office, one of the first post offices in Roanoke, for them to use it to convert into a community center. She invited Asa Sims, who was a horticulturalist at Hampton University, to come and help them with a landscape plan for some of these jobs that they'd been commissioned with. And he invited her the following year to come to Hampton University for the founding of statewide garden clubs. He saw the difference that she was making in Roanoke, and he thought if we had an organization, we could help women impact their communities more widely and more efficiently. So Ethel Early became the very first president of the NGC, and the group grew at an astonishing rate. So if they started with 7 clubs in 1932, and by 1942, they had 65 chapters. By 1955, they had 105 chapters. And just for reference, the Garden Club of Virginia had 42 chapters at this time. So the size and the spread of these clubs is impressive. They had annual conferences. They included plays, musical performances, worship services. They would have information cafeterias, which I love because of Ethel's cafeteria background, but they would have information cafeterias set up where you could go around and you could sample and learn about all sorts of different horticultural or botanical topics. Women who were involved in garden clubs would meet local dignitaries. They would have access to the brightest minds at Virginia Union University, over at VSU. They would have speakers come from all over to address women at these annual meetings. Also, they cooperated with white women's garden clubs in the neighborhood. They would invite those women to come in as speakers or as judges for the flower shows. Or they would arrange tours with these other garden clubs, and they would tour private gardens and public gardens in whatever city they happened to be visiting. There would have been more of these clubs, but during the Great Depression, of course, money was very tight, and the overextended but tireless William Cooper, who was the extension department leader at Hampton, said, even though they had so many clubs in the 40s and 50s, he said, we could have even more. The interest is even higher if only we had the money to be able to support these clubs and to send people out. So, so they were incredibly popular, and many people wanted to be a part of them because of the definite impact that they had on neighborhoods. What sort of things did they do? They challenged municipal neglect. A lot of their segregated neighborhoods did not get the kind of attention that they should have in terms of sanitation, in terms of upkeep, in terms of street lighting. So who stepped up to the plate to fight for those things? Women's garden clubs. They advanced community beautification. If the city wouldn't pay for landscaping for certain public schools and buildings, they raised their funds. Sometimes they partnered with other women's garden clubs, and they made it happen. They promoted conservation. They championed native plants. They also facilitated conservation and environmental education in segregated schools. The Garden Club of Virginia in the 1920s for a couple of years held writing contests on conservation. And one year they said the only students who are writing in to compete are students from segregated schools, from the African-American schools. the garden clubs were doing an amazing job of making sure these children had education in conservation and in plant care. And so they were the ones who were winning these awards in the 1920s. They also joined nationwide highway beautification efforts, and they also actively undermined segregation. And this wasn't an incidental thing. This was actually written into their handbook and their goals. This is a copy of the Handbook of the Negro Garden Club of Virginia, which is published in 1942. It's got a foreword by Eleanor Roosevelt. And it's one of the precious few handbooks that we have from this group. And the 4 values that they articulated were home improvement, community improvement, improving race relations, and then recreation and creative self-expression. These were the 4 things that they wanted their clubs to achieve in every locale where they were found.